I want you to know that I recorded this entire video for the Old Testament week 27, and I was actually holding my baby boy, and he was looking very cute in his plaid outfit from worship this morning. And when I went to edit it, none of the audio had picked up. I'd accidentally muted the recording, and so you miss out on seeing him. But let's now talk with full sound about week 27, talking about Solomon and the writing of the book of Ecclesiastes. So let's jump into that. Okay, the very first part of this week, we read about Solomon in the corresponding accounts of Kings and Chronicles. And what we see is Solomon falling away. All the wives that he has married, he has compromised his exclusive allegiance to Jehovah and has begun to worship their gods, is pulled away by them. The King's account goes into quite a bit of detail about God's plan to tear away most of the kingdom from Solomon's family and give it to somebody else, namely Jeroboam. But both accounts describe that apostasy of Solomon. Traditionally, we assume that Solomon went astray, and then at the end of his life, he came to his senses, so to speak. And we assume that because traditionally Ecclesiastes is ascribed to Solomon. He talks about being king in Jerusalem. And so under that assumption, let's think about what Solomon says as the preacher in the book of Ecclesiastes. The main word that shows up in English translations, vanity, meaninglessness, is a translation of the Hebrew word hevel. And that word actually describes something like what you see when you breathe on a cold day. It's that vapor, it's that smoke. I think the point of the preacher is not so much that life is meaningless, has no meaning, but it's that life is confusing, it's difficult, its meaning is often hard to ascertain, and therefore life is hard to navigate. In some ways, the message of Ecclesiastes is best understood in distinction to the message of the book of Proverbs. Proverbs talks about wisdom in a way that is very straightforward, very clear. This is the way you live. You live well according to God's wisdom, and life will work out well for you. Ecclesiastes comes along and says, yes, but life also has, in our broken world, it has this quality of confusion, uncertainty, and a darkness to it. And so that would explain what the preacher says about the fact that it doesn't matter if you're good, evil, rich, or poor. Everybody comes to the same end. Things come, things go. There's this never-ending cycle that always repeats itself. There's nothing new under the sun. And he says that if you try to control life, if you try to grab life by the horns, so to speak, that is ultimately a futile effort because life is hazy in that way. It's hevel. And when you try to grasp it, it escapes from you. Okay, that's the nature of life as the Ecclesiastes writer describes it, but there's a couple things within that he wants us to do or to understand. One that he will say throughout the book is that because of the nature of life, we should enjoy it. Someone has said that in Ecclesiastes, the preacher is encouraging to live life with an open hand. As that vapor of life comes and goes, as we receive things, both pleasant and difficult, and they go from us as well, that we should enjoy it, and when we have it, and not seize it and be distraught when we lose it, but whether it's the work God has given us to do, the blessings we enjoy, the people in our life, our family, to enjoy these things as gifts from God. That's how we are to live well in the view of Ecclesiastes. And then, of course, the final conclusion will be in chapter 12, when all has been heard, the author comes back and says, this is it. Fear God, keep his commandments. This is the all of man. This is what it means to be human. Based on the transient nature of life, what does it mean to be human? To enjoy and have pleasure and all the things that we see here and now, these fleeting things? No. To be human is to be anchored to Jehovah God, to fear him, to keep his commandments. That's wisdom. Do notice, by the way, that this is not just something he says in chapter 12, but the preacher several times throughout will point to this very idea of fearing God and keeping his commandments And that is how we anchor ourselves to certainty in the midst of an uncertain world.